only on DD India.
Hello and welcome to this edition of News on the Hour. I'm Rukma with you, and over the next 60 minutes, we'll be taking you through all the top stories that we are covering, making headlines across India and the world. As we focus on the Prime Minister's visit to the United States of America currently underway, yesterday was a power-packed day with meetings with top honchos of various companies and his meeting with the first ever meeting with the Vice President of the US, Kamala Harris. Also, we'll be taking a look at what's on his agenda today as well. Another high-powered day with our reporters on the ground, also news from sports and much more. But first, here are the headlines. Ahead of the Quad Summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi holds talks with Japanese and Australian counterparts in Washington, D.C. Leaders discuss a wide range of subjects aimed at deepening economic and people-to-people linkages between the two countries. Prime Minister Narendra Modi holds first in-person meeting with US Vice President Kamala Harris, exchanges views on recent global and regional developments. Harris suo motu refers to Pakistan's terror role, agrees on need to monitor its support to terrorism. Also invites Kamala Harris to India. PM Modi to hold face-to-face meeting with US President Joe Biden today. Prime Minister to participate in first in-person Quad Leaders Summit, important grouping of US, India, Australia and Japan to discuss various regional and international issues. To also take stock of outcomes of virtual summit in March this year. Prime Minister holds extensive discussions with CEOs of and top business leaders, including that of Qualcomm, Adobe, General Atomics, First Solar and Blackstone on India's investment potential. They were appreciative of India's reform trajectory. Back home, President Ramnath Kovind virtually confers National Service Scheme Awards for 2019 to 20. Award recognizes outstanding contributions towards voluntary community service to further promote NSS in the country. Sports Minister Anurag Thakur and MOS Nishit Pramanik attend ceremony. Over 84 crore 15 lakh COVID vaccine doses administered so far under nationwide vaccination drive. 31,382 new cases reported in the last 24 hours, while over 32,000 patients recover. Recovery rate increased to 97.78%. In business, Indian equity benchmarks surged to new all-time highs. Sensex rises by 375 points. Nifty jumps 106 points as markets scale record highs. And in our top story, Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a bilateral meeting with his Japanese counterpart Yoshihide Suga on the sidelines of the Quad Leaders Summit yesterday. Both the Prime Ministers expressed happiness at their first in-person meeting and warmly recalled their 3 telephone conversations since September 2020. When Suga took office as Prime Minister of Japan. PM Modi thanked the Japanese Premier for his personal commitment and leadership in enabling great advances in the India-Japan Special Strategic and Global Partnership over the last few years. PM Modi also congratulated Prime Minister Suga for successfully hosting the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympic Games in the midst of a global pandemic. The two Prime Ministers exchanged views on the recent global developments, including Afghanistan, and reaffirmed their commitment towards a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region.
The two Prime Ministers discussed exchanged views on recent global developments, including Afghanistan, They also reaffirmed their commitment towards the free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific region. They agreed to enhance bilateral security and defense cooperation, including in the areas of defense equipment and technologies. The two prime ministers reaffirmed their commitment to advance efforts to facilitate the smooth and timely implementation of the Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed rail project.
Besides, both the Prime Ministers also reviewed the multifaceted relationship between the two countries and exchanged views on recent global and regional developments and welcomed the increasing economic engagement. They welcomed the launch of the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative between India, Japan and Australia earlier this year. Prime Minister Modi highlighted the need to develop bilateral partnerships in manufacturing, MSME and skill development. Prime Minister Suga informed Prime Minister Modi that in order to operationalize the Specified Skilled Workers Agreement, which was signed earlier this year, the Japanese side would be undertaking skill and language tests in India from early 2022. They highlighted the increasing importance of digital technologies and in this regard positively evaluated the progress in the India-Japan digital partnership, especially in startups. Discussions also took place on climate change issues and green energy transition and the potential for Japanese collaboration with India's national hydrogen energy mission. Prime Minister Suga expressed confidence that the strong momentum attained by the India-Japan partnership in the last few years will continue even under the new administration in Japan. Prime Minister Modi conveyed that he was looking forward to welcoming the next Prime Minister of Japan to India for the India-Japan Annual Summit in the near future. Earlier, Prime Minister Modi also held a bilateral meeting with his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison. Both the leaders discussed a broad range of issues which covered bilateral, regional and global issues of mutual interest. They also reviewed the progress.
With satisfaction the high-level engagement between the two countries, particularly the first recently held India-Australia 2+2 dialogue which was held in New Delhi. They reviewed progress since the last Leaders Summit that was held virtually in June 2020, and they resolved to continue their close partnership and cooperation for the mutual well-being of both sides.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison noted with satisfaction the regular high-level engagements between the two countries. The Prime Ministers reviewed the progress achieved since the leaders' virtual summit in June 2020 under the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership and resolved to continue close cooperation for mutual well-being and towards advancing their shared objective of an open, free, prosperous and rules-based Indo-Pacific region. They expressed satisfaction at the ongoing negotiations on a bilateral comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. In that context, they welcomed the visit to India by former Australian Premier Tony Abbott as PM Scott Morrison's Special Trade Envoy for India and noted the commitment of both sides to achieve an early harvest announcement on an interim agreement by December 2021. The Prime Ministers highlighted or underlined the need for the international community to address the issue of climate change on an urgent basis. In this regard, Prime Minister Modi highlighted the need for a broader dialogue on environment protection, and also they discussed possibilities of providing clean technologies. The Prime Ministers agreed that as two vibrant democracies in the region, the two countries needed to work closer together to overcome the challenges in the post-pandemic world, inter alia, to enhance supply chain resilience. They lauded the immense contribution of the Indian diaspora to Australia's economy and society and discussed ways to enhance people-to-people ties. India and America are natural partners and the two countries have similar values, geopolitical interests and coordination and cooperation which is ever increasing. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said this as he held the first in-person meeting with US Vice President Kamala Harris at the White House. The two leaders talked about multiple subjects that will further cement ties between the two countries, which are based on shared values and cultural linkages. Prime Minister Modi also invited Vice President Kamala Harris and Second Gentleman of the United States Douglas M. Hoff to visit India soon.
The India Connect reiterated.
विश्व की सबसे बड़ी और सबसे पुरानी डेमोक्रेसीज के रूप में भारत और अमेरिका नेचुरल पार्टनर है और हमारा तालमेल और सहयोग भी निरंतर बढ़ता जा रहा है। कोविड हो, क्लाइमेट हो या फिर क्वाड, सभी पर अमेरिका ने बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण इनिशिएटिव लिए हैं। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और आपके नेतृत्व में हमारे संबंध नई ऊंचाई हासिल करेंगे।
As democracies around the world are under threat, it is imperative that we defend democratic principles and institutions within our respective countries and around the world. I know from personal experience and from my family of the commitment of the Indian people to democracy and to freedom and to the work that may be done and can be done to imagine and then actually achieve our vision for democratic principles and institutions.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Vice President Kamala Harris for the first time at the Eisenhower Building near the White House. From a vibrant bilateral partnership to covering emerging and critical technologies, healthcare, education, and people-to-people connect, the two leaders discussed all facets of India-US ties. Prime Minister Modi and Vice President Harris exchanged views on recent global developments, including in Afghanistan, and reaffirmed their commitment towards a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific.
India, of course, is a very important partner to the United States. Throughout our history, our nations have worked together, have stood together to make our world a safer and stronger world, be it COVID-19, the climate crisis, and the importance of our shared belief in a free and open Indo-Pacific region.
The two leaders discussed the COVID-19 situation in their respective countries, including ongoing efforts to contain the pandemic through expedited vaccination efforts and ensuring supply of critical medicines, therapeutics, and healthcare equipment. Both sides acknowledged the importance of collaborative action on climate change. Prime Minister spoke about India's push for increasing renewable energy and the recently launched National Hydrogen Mission. He also emphasized the importance of lifestyle changes to promote environmental sustainability.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.
The strong commitment of both Prime Minister Modi and Vice President Harris to further deepen bilateral ties was evident in their first meeting, adding another chapter to India-US ties. With Gautam Roy in Washington, D.C., Bureau Report for DD India.
Prime Minister Modi and Vice President Harris also talked about terrorism. Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla informed that at her meeting with PM Modi, Kamala Harris suo motu referred to Pakistan's terror role. She also agreed on the need to monitor Pakistan's support to terrorism.
In that context, when the issue of terrorism came up, the Vice President suo motu referred to Pakistan's role in that regard. She said that there were terror groups that were working there. She asked Pakistan to take action so that these groups do not impact on US security and that of India. She agreed with the Prime Minister's briefing on the fact of cross-border terrorism and the fact that India had been a victim of terrorism for several decades now, and on the need to rein in and closely monitor Pakistan's support for such terrorist groups.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Thursday held interactions with top 5 CEOs of American companies in Washington. They included chief executive officers of Qualcomm, Adobe, First Solar, General Atomics, and Blackstone. They were all praised for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership for reform in India to facilitate investment and the ease of doing business. More in this report.
India has been Blackstone's best market for investment in the world.
Great place for invest.
Thanks to his leadership that there has been so many policy reforms in the last several years.
It's awesome. Indian startups are actually having as their growth the entire world.
With his leadership and what he's done to create a really strong balance between industrial policy as well as trade policy makes it an ideal opportunity for companies like First Solar.
Measures taken by the government on fronts of policy reforms, investment facilitation, and the ease of doing business have resulted in increased trust of investors from around the world. On Thursday, the CEOs of the world's leading companies wholeheartedly expressed their faith in India's growth story during their interaction with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. During his interaction with CEO of Qualcomm, the Prime Minister said that since Qualcomm has trusted Indian talent already, it can now start manufacturing with the advantage the PLI scheme offers. Prime Minister also spoke about the new liberalized drone policy and said that Qualcomm could take part in new opportunities in the new emerging market. While Qualcomm CEO expressed enthusiasm to work with India on ambitious digital transformation programs, including in 5G, PM Wani and others. Amon also expressed interest in partnering with India to work in the field of semiconductors.
It's been a great place for invest in not only to invest directly, but also to support other companies. For example, we have built a Qualcomm Design in India program that would today we help 77 startup companies in India design based on our technology. We have been investing with our venture, fund in new India startups, and we think we have been very successful to date with all the investments we made in India.
Next was the interaction with Shantanu Narayan, the CEO of Adobe, who's of Indian origin. They discussed Adobe's ongoing collaboration and future investment plans in India. Discussions also focused on India's flagship program, Digital India, and the use of emerging technologies in sectors like health, education, and R&D. PM and CEO of Adobe both emphasized on creating centers of excellence in artificial intelligence in India. Shantanu expressed desire to bring video and animation to every child in India.
As an Indian American, what could be more inspiring or a matter of pride than seeing what the Prime Minister is doing to really encourage startups, to really encourage investment in India. So, a huge supporter and fan of what the Prime Minister is doing.
Staying with the focus on clean energy, in his interaction with the CEO of First Solar, Mark Widmer, Prime Minister spoke about One World, One Sun and One Grid initiative and its potential. He referred to India's ambitious target of 450 gigawatts of renewable energy. He also emphasized on India's focus on manufacturing of solar energy and advantage of PLI schemes in the field. Mark Widmer expressed happiness with Indian policies for climate change and related industries.
I think if every country could embrace and emulate what India has done, our ability to hit the long-term climate goal objectives that are established in the Paris Accord won't be a problem. I think India's leadership as it relates to being very aggressive in its commitment towards renewable energy, 450 gigawatts by the end of this decade, and enabling policies in support of that and enabling domestic capability to ensure the most competitively advantaged and lowest cost way to deliver renewable energy into the market.
The meeting with the CEO of General Atomic provided an opportunity to the Prime Minister to highlight India's liberal drone policy and the benefits of the PLI scheme. CEO Vivek Lal said that dedicated drone hub can be created in India to support the entire ecosystem of drones.
Many of my colleagues at US companies see India as a very promising destination from a two-way standpoint, not only technologies and investments in, but coming back to the US. So I think it's a win-win. The policies and reforms that have been put in place by both countries, I think benefit both countries, and that is why this is a sustainable model.
The last meeting in the series was with the CEO of Blackstone. Schwarzman spoke of his company's investment plans in India and the plans to further ramp it up to $40 billion over the next 5 years. The Prime Minister elaborated on the reforms undertaken in India, including setting up of bad banks and asset monetization.
This is a very friendly government for outsiders like ourselves to be dealing with. They're very smart, they're very reform-oriented, they're objective. What can be done? How quickly can it be done? How sensible is it? Is it a benefit to India and benefit to outsiders? So I would give them an extremely high grade as being good partners for people who'd like to bring capital into the country to create jobs.
The choice of CEOs that Prime Minister Narendra Modi met today indicates the priorities of his government. It's not just about chasing investments, but also about staying ahead of the disruption curve. With camera person Vinay Tiwari, this is Gautam Roy in Washington DC for DD India.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi will participate in the first in-person Quad Leaders Summit along with US President Joe Biden today. The Prime Minister of Japan will also participate, and as well as Australian PM Scott Morrison. The summit provides an opportunity to take stock of the outcomes of the virtual summit in March this year. Here's more in this report.
Flag bearer of freedom, democracy, peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. The Quad is all set for its first in-person leadership summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be meeting with his three Quad counterparts, US President Joe Biden, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga and Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison in the White House on Friday, the 24th of September.
The Quad was elevated when the Quad leaders met online or in the virtual mode in March this year itself. It got three working groups, one on the vaccines, the other on climate change, and the third on new and emerging technologies. Now one has to see when the Quad leaders meet in person at the White House, how will this elevation go into the phase of expansion? Expansion in taking vaccines out to the world, expansion in the sense of taking climate action, working on green technologies, ensuring that disaster mitigation is the topmost thing on the leaders' minds, and of course critical technologies is another area where the Quad leaders will amplify their cooperation and ensure that not only the Indo-Pacific region is secure and safe, there is a balance of power over there, it is also prosperous and peaceful.
As it relates to the Indo-Pacific, the United States, like India, feels very strongly about the pride of being a member of the Indo-Pacific, but also the fragility and the importance and strength as well of those relationships, including maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific.
The historic Quad Summit marks the coming of age of what began as an informal grouping of four powerful nations.
Our four democracies are working together to ensure that we can have the collaboration in areas such as education, such as clean technology and financing, and in the tools and technologies that will help us to combat climate change. We're also looking at kind of the future economy and how we can collaborate on 5G, how we can collaborate on secure supply chains.
The idea of Quad came after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. The pandemic has proved to be a key turning point, along with multiple geopolitical developments that have brought what was initially called a security dialogue to a multifaceted partnership.
In Washington DC with camera person Smriti Ranjan, this is Gautam Roy for DD India.
Meanwhile, Indian Americans are closely watching Prime Minister Narendra Modi's US visit. and hoping that his face-to-face meeting with US President Joe Biden will lead to a camaraderie between the two leaders.
The meeting of the world's oldest and largest democracies, bound by the same values of freedom and liberty. Both have known each other for long, but this is the first time the two leaders are meeting in person after Joe Biden became America's president. He has much to talk about with Prime Minister Modi in taking common good initiatives forward.
The last 2 decades, the relationship between the United States and India has been heading in positive and upward direction. The relationship is old, but as you have correctly pointed out, it is moving ahead. In fact, in the first 100 days of Biden administration, we have had intensive interactions between our two democratic polities. This is despite all the pressures of COVID and the limitations that have been placed by it.
When Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Joe Biden meet in person for the first time, they will be talking about defense co-production, climate change, green technologies as well as critical technologies, affordable healthcare and even education.
The two sides kept interacting constantly with each other ever since Joe Biden took office this year. Prime Minister Modi spoke to President Biden over the phone in January, soon after he was declared the presidential contest winner. Prime Minister and Biden spoke to each other on 2 more occasions over the phone. The two leaders have also attended 3 virtual summits together, one each on Quad, climate change and COVID vaccines. The agenda of their bilateral is fairly well chalked out. Both leaders are working together to donate more and more life-saving vaccines to the world. The Quad cooperation also focused on that goal apart from tackling climate change. Securing supply chains for semiconductors is also another ambitious goal which involves capacity building. The issue of trade still remains a sticking point apart, which remains to be ironed out.
I think that there is enormous vision in both countries and in both leaders, both governments, and what I think we need to do is make sure that we are focused on execution of that vision. The devil is in the details, and so as we look to deepen our strategic and economic partnership, there needs to be a focus on trade, there needs to be a focus on aligning the policies and the regulatory environment.
The two issues which will witness intense deliberations in Afghanistan and the role played by Pakistan and China in seeking to legitimize the de facto Taliban regime, the two leaders are likely to resolve to never allow forces of terrorism sanctuaries in Afghanistan target their territories and people, to keep pushing for an inclusive and effective government in Kabul.
There is a lot that these two countries have done together for the betterment of both the societies, and there's a lot more that there's left to explore and get done as well in the coming days. In Washington DC with camera person Smriti Ranjan, this is Gautam Roy, DD India.
And our correspondent Ramesh Ramachandran spoke to Dr. Waheguru Pal Singh Sidhu, Professor of Center for Global Affairs at New York University, about India-US bilateral relations, the Quad Summit and the 76th United Nations General Assembly Summit.
With me is Professor W.P.S. Sidhu for Center of Global Affairs at the New York University to give you, the viewer, a sense of what to expect from Prime Minister's engagements here in New York at the UNGA, and also to talk about Prime Minister's ongoing engagements in Washington DC as well. Professor Sidhu, welcome to DD India. First off the bat, your take or your thoughts on Prime Minister's meetings in Washington DC.
There are 4 Ds that define the Prime Minister's visit this time around. 1, development, 2nd, defense, 3rd, diaspora, and 4th, diplomacy at the highest level. Starting with development, as you know, he's been meeting with a lot of CEOs in Washington, D.C. Number 2, you mentioned the meeting with Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, is very much linked to the 2nd D, defense. And this you can see both at the bilateral level, but also at the plurilateral level of the Quad. Then the 3rd is, of course, diaspora. And I think there is no better sense of the diaspora that the better the Indian diaspora does in the United States, the better the case is made for India. And the meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris really underlined that. Right from COVID-19, where it was not just the US government, but even diaspora, who were reaching out to family members and friends to help in whatever way at a time that India was going through a very difficult phase of COVID-19. Last but not the least, of course, is diplomacy. And diplomacy is obviously not just in Washington, D.C., which is at the bilateral and the plurilateral level, but also in New York at the multilateral level.
Prime Minister Modi is also meeting the US President Joe Biden here in Washington, D.C. How do you look at the evolution of the US-India ties in general, and what might be the next big idea in the relationship?
There is a trajectory of US-India relations which is on the up. It has been going steadily on the up, irrespective of who is in the White House. And that really shows, again, the kind of consensus in the US. What individual presidents are able to do is to provide a greatest impetus, fillip, to that, basically they change the pace of it, not the direction. And that, I think, is the importance of this visit.
How do you look at the evolution of the Quad, 1, and 2? Would the AUKUS defence pact between the UK, US and Australia overshadow the Quad?
I think the Quad is turning out to be the big idea that President Biden is certainly pushing forward to, because, he has held, this is the second summit, at Leaders Summit of Quad within a year. You can see Quad is almost starting, even within its members now, starting to follow different tracks. There is one track which is more interested in the defensive part of it, right? And AUKUS is a very good example of that. The other part or members are not necessarily so keen on confronting China, but simply wanting China to play by the rules. And to set up, other ways of doing that, maybe an alternative to Belt Road Initiative, other development approaches, providing the kind of support and assistance that countries are looking to China for.
That was Professor Sidhu talking about Prime Minister's ongoing visit to the US. He talks about 4 Ds: defense, diaspora, diplomacy and development that will characterize the Prime Minister's engagements here in the US. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran with my camera person Saurabh Shukla in New York City for DD India.
And the year 2021 marks 2 decades of the heinous terror attack at the World Trade Center Twin Towers in New York in the United States on the 9th of September 2001. A number of world leaders have been visiting the 9/11 memorial to pay homage. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be in New York, where he will be addressing the 76th United Nations General Assembly session. With India and many other countries facing the wrath of terror activities, PM Modi is expected to again talk about adoption of the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism in his UNGA address. Notably, in 2014, when Modi addressed the UN General Assembly after taking over as the Prime Minister, he urged all countries to adopt the CCIT.
I'm coming to you from the 9/11 memorial right behind me here in the heart of New York City. Now, this is the place where the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center used to stand. Those Twin Towers were brought down on 11th September 2001 in a terror attack which claimed thousands of lives, and their names are inscribed on these plaques right behind me. The names of every one of those people who was killed in those terror attacks that took place here in New York City on the 11th of September 2001. And those people also included many Indians, by the way. Now, 2021 marks the 20th anniversary of those terror attacks, and in the last several weeks we have seen many a world leader coming here to pay homage to those killed in those terror attacks. Now, when we talk about terrorism, India is itself been a victim of terrorism for many, many decades now. In fact, in 1996, a full 5 years before these terror attacks in New York City, India moved what is known as the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, also known by its acronym CCIT. But that document has remained a draft 25 years and counting. There's been absolutely no consensus on the adoption of this document. Why? Because there's no consensus on the definition of terrorism, what constitutes terrorism, and India has been raising this issue of terrorism, extremism and radicalization at every world fora, including United Nations General Assembly. Now, Prime Minister Modi himself has raised this issue a number of times in his interventions here at the UNGA in New York City since he first came to power in 2014. And one can expect Prime Minister Modi to again talk about this crucial issue in his address to the UNGA this week here in New York City. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran with camera person Saurabh Shukla in New York City for DD India.
Back home, President Ramnath Kovind conferred the National Service Scheme Awards for the year 2019-20 from Rashtrapati Bhavan via virtual mode today. Union Minister of Youth Affairs and Sports Anurag Thakur and Minister of State for Youth Affairs and Sports Nishit Pramanik attended the ceremony virtually. The National Service Scheme Award for the year has been conferred on 42 awardees in 3 different categories like University, +2 councils, NSS units and their program officers and NSS volunteers. Addressing the event, President Kovind said, as the nation celebrates its 75th year of independence, the contribution of the National Service Scheme volunteers is highly commendable.
युवा देश का भविष्य है और इस समय जब देश कोविड महामारी से जूझ रहा है, मुझे जानकर प्रसन्नता हो रही है कि पूरे देश में राष्ट्रीय सेवा योजना स्वयंसेवकों ने सामुदायिक सेवाओं के लिए पूरे मन से काम किया है और जब भी देश के ऊपर कोई राष्ट्रीय संकट होता है तो राष्ट्रीय सेवा योजना के हमारे स्वयंसेवक हमेशा आगे आकर
That was Union Minister for Youth Affairs and Sports speaking at the event. He attended it virtually. Let's now take a look at the COVID-19 situation from across the country. With the administration of 72,20,642 vaccine doses in the past 24 hours, our COVID vaccination coverage has now crossed the landmark of 84 crores. Cumulatively, 84 crore 15 lakh 18,026 vaccine doses have been administered so far. Further, the recovery of 32,542 patients in the last 24 hours has increased our cumulative tally of recovered patients to 3 crore 28 lakh 48,273. Consequently, India's recovery rate stands at 97.78%. The recovery rate is currently at its highest since March 2020. 31,382 new cases were reported in the past 24 hours. The active case load is presently 3,162,000. Active cases presently constitute 0.89% of the country's total positive cases. This is the lowest figure in active cases in India since March 2020. The testing capacity also continues to expand. The last 24 hours saw a total of 15,65,696 tests being conducted. India has so far conducted over 55 crore 99 lakh cumulative tests, while testing capacity has been enhanced across the country. Weekly positivity rate stands at 2.07%, less than 3% for the last 91 days now. The daily positivity rate is reported to be 2%. The daily positivity rate has remained below 3% for the past 25 days and below 5% for 108 consecutive days now. In some business news, Indian equity benchmark surged to new all-time highs, wherein the BSE benchmark index, S&P BSE Sensex, crossed the 60,000 mark for the first time, and Nifty moved above its important psychological level of 17,900. The Sensex rose as much as 427 points to hit a record high of 60,000, and the Nifty 50 index touched an all-time high of 17,000. The market was led by gains in Infosys, HDFC Bank, Tata Consultancy Services, ICICI Bank, HCL Technologies and Larsen & Toubro amid positive global cues. Let's now take a look at Wall Street. US stocks closed higher on Thursday as investors appeared relieved about the Federal Reserve's stance on tapering stimulus and raising interest rates. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 502.55 points to 34,760.87. The S&P 500 gained 52.84 points to 4,448.48, and the Nasdaq Composite added 151.28 points to 15,048.13. In sports now, first an update from the Indian Premier League. Team Chennai Super Kings will lock horns with the Royal Challengers Bangalore. Virat Kohli-led Royal Challengers Bangalore are looking for their first win in the second leg of the IPL. After a humiliating performance and a crushing defeat against Kolkata Knight Riders, Virat's team looks forward to a strong comeback. On the other hand, under Dhoni's captaincy, Chennai Super Kings aims to maintain its top of the points table while maintaining its winning streak. This match will be played for the first time at the Sharjah Cricket Stadium. In IPL again, Kolkata Knight Riders beat Mumbai Indians by 7 wickets at the Sheikh Zayed Stadium, Abu Dhabi. Put into bat first, Mumbai Indians posted 155 runs for 6 in the stipulated 20 overs with the help of Quinton de Kock's 55 off 42 and Rohit Sharma's 33 off 30 balls. For Kolkata, Lockie Ferguson and Prasidh Krishna picked up 2 wickets apiece while Sunil Narine took 1. In reply, Kolkata easily chased down the target in just 15.1 overs for the loss of 3 wickets, riding on Ian Morgan's unbeaten knock of 74 off 42 and Venkatesh Iyer's 53 off 30 balls. For Mumbai, Jasprit Bumrah scalped all 3 wickets. Earlier, Kolkata won the toss and elected to bowl first. The ICC has launched the official anthem of the upcoming T20 World Cup. Composed by Bollywood music director Amit Trivedi, an animated film features young fans from all over the world engaged in T20 cricket and includes some of the sport's biggest superstars. Indian captain Kohli leads the group of players brought to life as avatars in the animation that interact with each other throughout. Kohli is joined by fellow captain Pollard of the reigning champions West Indies, as well as Australian all-rounder Glenn Maxwell and Rashid Khan of Afghanistan. The animation features a brand new broadcast technology that blends both 3D and 2D effects and to create the film. The tournament will begin on the 17th of October in Oman and the UAE, with the final to be played in Dubai on November 14th. A total of 16 countries featuring the sport's biggest names and best teams will compete in this biggest event of the sport since the COVID pandemic. A 50-year-old ban on the export of the famous Ladakh apricot was lifted recently, and farmers in the Union Territory exported their first consignment to Dubai. Here's a report.
Well, I'm having the popular Ladakhi apricot. Now, recently, something big, something significant happened here. A 50-year-old ban on the export of this apricot was lifted by the central government, and its first consignment was exported to Dubai from Kargil. Now, this gives a big boost to not just to farmers in Kargil, but the entire Ladakh region.
Apricot is the primary cash crop for the farmers of Ladakh, mostly produced during summer months. In 1974, the then government had banned the export of the citrus fruit to avoid the spread of codling moth, a pest believed to enter from the northwestern Afghanistan and Pakistan. This restricted the marketing and supply of apricots.
पिछले 3 दिनों से लेह में घूम रहा हूँ. एप्रिकॉट हमने पहले दिन यहाँ टेस्ट किए, बहुत ही स्वादिष्ट लगे हमें. फिर लोकल यहाँ जो वेंडर्स उनसे बात करके पता चला कि इनको जो प्रॉपर प्राइस है वो लोकल मार्केट में मिलती नहीं है. बट रिसेंटली यहाँ के कुछ लोगों ने मिलके ये प्रोडक्ट को मिडिल ईस्ट में एक्सपोर्ट का काम चालू किया है और आई थिंक उससे लोकल फार्मर जरूर कुछ ना कुछ तरह से गेनर होंगे किसी न किसी तरह से और उनको अच्छे प्राइस मिलेंगे.
कल हमने टेस्ट किया था इसको, 250 ग्राम लिया था मैंने 50 रुपीज में, तो हम लोगों को बहुत अच्छा लगा ये.
Over the years, there was no effort to lift the ban. Recently, the Modi government lifted this ban and Kargil apricot growers flagged off their first ever international export to Dubai.
ये सब लद्दाख का ही होता है. फिर हम ये पाव का 50 होते हैं और ये 10 रुपए किलो होता है. लद्दाख के बाहर भी बेचते हो, खासकर यही लद्दाख का ही बेचते हैं ना, क्योंकि टूरिस्ट ज्यादा आता है यहाँ, इसीलिए यहाँ सब इधर बेचने के लिए ऐसे होता है.
A boon for Ladakh's economy, the move is going to prove to be an impetus for not just farmers, but young entrepreneurs as well.
Ladakh produces 62% of India's apricots, and with the lifting of this export ban, it will only benefit the local farmers. It will help them receive the real value of their crop, as well as benefit the economy of the Ladakh Union Territory. As for all of us, well, the Ladakhi apricot is rich in vitamin C, potassium, vitamin A, carbohydrates. The list is endless. So next time you're in Ladakh, make sure you taste the absolutely fantastic, delicious Ladakhi apricot and be a part of the Ladakhi culture in your own little small way. With Anand Kashyap and video journalist Mohit Joshi, this is Shreya Upadhyay for Doordarshan.
And now, moving on, let's take a look at what we have for you in today's episode of Saga of Freedom. Today we talk about the great revolutionary Prithilatha Vaddar and freedom fighter Bhikaji Rustam Kama. Their commitment and life's patience is an example of patriotism.
In today's episode, we pay tribute to the great Indian revolutionary Prithilatha Vaddar, who sacrificed her life for the freedom of India at the young age of 21 on this day in 1932. She was devoted to the cause of Indian independence and was inspired by the valor of Rani Lakshmibai since her school days.
She completed her education in Kolkata and took up the job of headmistress at English medium secondary school in a native place in Chittagong. It was here that she joined revolutionaries under the leadership of famous freedom fighter Master Da Surya Sen.
মন্দির সোপান তলে কত প্রাণ হলো বলিদান লেখা আছে অশ্রু জলে কত বিপ্লবী বন্ধুর রক্তে রাঙা বন্দিশালার ওই শিকলধারা.
Prithilatha firmly believed that women should also take a leading role in the armed struggle against the British.
One of Prithi's brothers was involved in revolutionary politics, and it was he who introduced her to Surya Sen, who accepted Prithilatha as the first woman member of his revolutionary group. She was a prominent member of the Special Revolutionary Operations for the destruction of the telephone and telegraph office and the capture of the Reserve Police line in Jalalabad Hills Battle in 1932. Thereafter, Prithilatha led 15 revolutionaries to the Pahartali European Club in a successful raid.
However, Prithilatha, dressed as a man, was trapped without a way of escape on that fateful night and chose to give up her life rather than being a prisoner to the British administration. Her martyrdom created a huge stir and acted as an inspiration for revolutionaries across India. We salute her unflinching love for the nation.
Today, we also remember freedom fighter Bhikaji Rustam Kama. popularly known as Madam Kama, who was born on this day in 1861 in Mumbai.
It was in London that she met nationalist Shyamji Krishna Varma and Dadabhai Nauroji and got inspired to work for the Indian freedom struggle.
Kama supported the founding of the Indian Home Rule Society in London in 1905. Later, she relocated to Paris and co-founded the Paris Indian Society. Together with other notable members of the movement for Indian sovereignty living in exile, Kama wrote, published and distributed revolutionary literature for the movement.
On the 22nd of August 1907, Kama attended the Second Socialist Congress at Stuttgart, Germany, and appealed for human rights, equality and freedom from imperialist Great Britain. She unfurled what she called the flag of Indian independence. Later, this flag was brought into British India by Indulal Yagnik and is currently on display at the Maratha and Kesari Library in Pune. The flag raised by Kama also served as one of the templates from which the current national flag of India has been created.
Madam Kama's legacy continues through her love and sacrifice for Indian independence. Several Indian cities have streets and places named after her. On 26 January 1962, India's 11th Republic Day, the Indian Post and Telegraph Department issued a commemorative stamp in her honor. Her life is one of grit, determination and love for the nation. We salute her indomitable spirit.
Well, that's all we have for you in this edition of News on the Hour. We hope you enjoyed our show. Meanwhile, news and updates continue on DD India. Also, as you step out of your homes today, don't forget to wear a mask, maintain social distancing. The fight against COVID is not yet over. So stay at home as much as possible, stay safe and get yourself vaccinated. That's all from me for now.